Imagine the city of Jerusalem under a dim, gray sky, filled with an air of sorrow and loss. The streets that once echoed with the laughter of children and the bustle of daily life are now shadowed by the footprints of an invading force. The kingdom of Judah has fallen to the powerful empire of Babylon, and among the captives are young Daniel and his friends, boys with dreams, raised in the traditions and faith of their fathers. These young men were the pride of their families, known for their wisdom, courage, and devotion to God. But now, they find themselves forced into a new world, with unfamiliar sights and sounds. Tall, imposing structures with intricate carvings tower above them, temples dedicated to gods they do not know, and a language that twists and turns in ways they can barely comprehend. They have been uprooted from everything they've known and transported into the heart of Babylon, an empire proud of its power and eager to reshape these young captives into loyal servants of the king. As they enter the city, they're struck by the grandeur but also by a sense of darkness, a weight in the air. Babylon is magnificent but filled with customs and beliefs that feel foreign and unsettling. Their captors dress in rich, colorful robes, and the people around them bow to idols of gold, stone, and wood. For Daniel and his friends, it's a clash of worlds. Everything in Babylon seems to stand in contrast to the teachings they hold dear, the teachings of the one true God. But despite the foreign culture pressing in on them, Daniel and his friends carry a light within. The faith of their fathers, the stories of Abraham, Moses, and David, they remember them all. Even in chains, their spirits remain unbroken. They know who they are and to whom they belong. As they settle into this new, overwhelming life, they begin to face pressures they've never known before. They're not just captives. They're expected to learn the language, the customs, and the beliefs of the Babylonians. The king himself, Nebuchadnezzar, has plans for them. He sees potential in these young men and orders that they be taught by the finest scholars in Babylon. They will be trained to serve in his court, to think like Babylonians, and to adopt the ways of the empire. But in their hearts, Daniel and his friends quietly make a vow. They will learn what is necessary to survive in this new land, but they will not forget who they are. Their faith and identity are sacred, a beacon guiding them through the unfamiliar. And though they walk in the shadow of a foreign king, they know they are ultimately servants of the King of Kings. In this land of idols and false gods, they will stand as a light, a reminder of the God who delivered their people in the past and who, they believe, will one day deliver them again. As Daniel and his friends settled into the heart of Babylon, they faced an unexpected challenge, one that sought not only to change their minds, but to redefine who they were. One day, they were summoned before the officials of the king's court. Standing tall and serious, a royal steward approached, his gaze fixed on them with a look of purpose. From this day forward, he announced, "You will be known by new names, names that honor the gods of Babylon." For Daniel, the steward declared the name Belteshazzar, a name meant to honor Bel, a deity of Babylon. Hananiah was renamed Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. Each name carried a weight, an identity foreign to them, one meant to honor gods they did not serve, gods they believed held no power compared to the God of Israel. To many in the king's court, this might have seemed a small matter. A name was just a name. But to Daniel and his friends, names were more than words. They were symbols of identity, a reminder of where they came from and whom they belonged to. The names given to them by their families reflected their faith. Daniel, meaning God is my judge. Hananiah, the Lord is gracious. Mishael, who is like God? And Azariah, the Lord is my helper. Each name was a testimony to the God of Israel and a mark of their heritage. And so, while they answered when called by these new names, deep down, Daniel and his friends kept their true names alive within their hearts. Each time they heard Belteshazzar, Daniel remembered that he served only one God, the God who judged justly and righteously. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego echoed through the halls of Babylon, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah held on to their faith, each determined not to let these labels alter the truth of who they were. In a land that sought to redefine them, to turn their loyalty away from their God, they held firm. To Daniel and his friends, Their names might be changed, but their hearts would remain untouched, faithful to the God who had brought their ancestors out of Egypt, who had been with them through every trial. They knew that staying true in this foreign land would not be easy, but if their names, their language, and even their customs could be altered, their faith, they vowed, would remain untouched. Soon after, Daniel and his friends faced another test, a subtle one, woven into the daily life of the palace. Every day, lavish feasts were brought before them. Trays of rich meats, fine wines, and delicacies from the royal table. For most, it would have seemed a privilege, a chance to dine like kings. But Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah looked at these offerings with different eyes. They knew these foods had been sacrificed to idols, dedicated to the gods of Babylon. Eating this food would have meant more than just filling their bodies. It would have meant compromising their devotion, accepting something that went against the very heart of their faith. They felt the pull, the pressure to conform. After all, everyone around them enjoyed the food, drank the wine, celebrated the wealth of Babylon. It would have been so easy to follow, to partake without question. But Daniel, with a heart anchored in conviction, resolved not to defile himself or his friends. He approached the chief of the officials and spoke respectfully, yet with unwavering resolve. "Please," he requested, "let us be given only vegetables to eat and water to drink. Test us for 10 days and see if we do not appear as strong and healthy as those who eat the king's food." The official hesitated, fearing the wrath of the king if these young men appeared weaker. But Daniel's confidence and calm assurance won him over. And so, for 10 days, Daniel and his friends ate only what was pure in their eyes. Simple foods that honored their faith and reflected their commitment. As the days passed, something remarkable happened. While others feasted on the best of the king's table, Daniel and his friends grew stronger, healthier, and brighter in appearance than all the rest. The official, observing their radiance and vigor, was amazed. He allowed them to continue with their chosen diet, acknowledging a strength that could only come from the God they served. In this small act of resistance, Daniel and his friends demonstrated their faith in a quiet but powerful way. They hadn't shouted or rebelled. They had simply chosen to remain faithful, even in the details. And through this, they stood out, not only in strength and appearance but as symbols of unbreakable faith in a foreign land. As Daniel and his friends continued their lives in Babylon, their unwavering faith and disciplined lifestyle began to distinguish them even further. They excelled in their studies, mastering the language, literature, and sciences of the Babylonians with remarkable ease. Day by day, their wisdom and understanding grew, and it wasn't long before they surpassed even the most seasoned scholars in the king's court. The court officials took notice, as did King Nebuchadnezzar himself. Curious and perhaps even a bit skeptical, the king called for these 4 young men to test their knowledge. He presented them with difficult questions, challenges of logic, philosophy, and science, questions that had stumped the royal advisors. But Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah answered each one with insight and clarity that left the king and his counselors astonished. Nebuchadnezzar found himself unable to ignore what was before him. Here were 4 youths who had been strangers in his land, brought as captives from Jerusalem, and yet they possessed wisdom that surpassed even the finest minds in Babylon. The king declared that Daniel and his friends were 10 times wiser than all the magicians, enchanters, and scholars in his kingdom. But Daniel and his friends knew that their wisdom was not merely a result of study or skill. They believed that it was a gift from God, a divine insight that allowed them to understand things that others could not. They did not boast or claim credit for their brilliance. Instead, they remained humble, knowing that their wisdom was a testament to the God they served, a God who was with them even in a foreign land, guiding and teaching them. In the presence of wealth, influence, and the constant temptation to conform, Daniel and his friends held firm, and their wisdom became a light within the palace walls. To those around them, they seemed like any other young men of Babylon. But to those who looked closer, they were different, set apart by a quiet strength, an intelligence rooted not in earthly knowledge, but in faith and trust in a higher power. One night, a disturbing rumor spread through the palace. King Nebuchadnezzar had been haunted by a dream, one that left him restless and consumed by fear. In a fit of frustration, he summoned all the wise men of Babylon, demanding not only an interpretation but also that they reveal the dream itself. To the king, only someone with true insight could recount what he had dreamed without being told. The wise men were terrified. No one had ever asked for such a thing. How could they describe something they had not seen? As tension filled the room, the king's patience wore thin. Threats were issued and lives hung in the balance. But amid the fear and uncertainty, Daniel, calm and resolved, asked the king for time to seek understanding from God. That night, Daniel gathered his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and together, they prayed with intensity, pleading for God's mercy and wisdom. They knew that without divine help, they too would suffer the same fate as the rest of the wise men. In their small chamber, they called out in faith, trusting that God would reveal what no human could know. And then, in the quiet of the night, a vision came to Daniel. The dream of Nebuchadnezzar unfolded before his eyes, and with it, the meaning behind each detail. He saw a statue, massive and terrifying, made of various metals from head to toe: gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay. And as he watched, a stone, uncut by human hands, struck the statue and shattered it, symbolizing the fall of kingdoms and the rise of one eternal kingdom. When morning came, Daniel approached the king with confidence, not in his own strength, but in the knowledge that God had answered their prayer. Standing before Nebuchadnezzar, he humbly declared, "No wise man, enchanter, or magician can explain this mystery, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries." Daniel then described the king's dream in detail, explaining how each part of the statue represented kingdoms that would rise and fall, and how the stone represented a kingdom established by God that would endure forever. As Daniel spoke, the king's eyes widened with astonishment, for every word confirmed the dream that had plagued his mind. Nebuchadnezzar was overcome, acknowledging that Daniel's God was indeed the God of gods and Lord of kings. In gratitude, he honored Daniel with gifts and high status, appointing him to a position of great authority within the kingdom, and granting his friends prominent roles in the governance of Babylon. But to Daniel and his friends, the true victory was not in the titles or honors. It was in witnessing the power of God's wisdom at work, a wisdom that transcended earthly knowledge and fear. In a kingdom filled with idols and false gods, Daniel and his friends stood as witnesses to the one who held all wisdom and authority, reminding everyone in Babylon that true power belonged to the God they served. Not long after Daniel's rise in the king's favor, a new command was issued throughout the kingdom, one that tested the very core of faith for his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. King Nebuchadnezzar, intoxicated by his own power and inspired by his dream, ordered the construction of a massive golden statue. This towering idol was to be worshipped by all people in the kingdom, and a decree was made. When the sound of music filled the air, every person, regardless of rank or background, was to bow down and worship the golden image. Anyone who refused would be thrown into a blazing furnace. The day came when the music sounded, and across the plains of Dura, people fell to their knees in worship. But among the crowd, three figures remained standing. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah would not bow to this image, for they served the one true God. Their defiance quickly reached the ears of Nebuchadnezzar, who was furious. He summoned them to his court, giving them one last chance to obey his command and bow to the idol. But their answer was resolute. "O king," they declared, "we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image you have set up." Enraged, Nebuchadnezzar ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual, so intense that even the guards preparing it were overcome by the flames. Bound and fully clothed, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were thrown into the blazing furnace, a sight that struck fear into all who witnessed it. But as Nebuchadnezzar looked into the flames, his anger turned to shock. He saw not 3, but 4 figures walking unharmed in the fire. One of them, shining with an otherworldly radiance, looked like a son of the gods. Overcome, Nebuchadnezzar called out, ordering them to come out of the fire. To the amazement of all, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah emerged unscathed, their hair unsinged, their clothes untouched by the flames, without even the smell of smoke upon them. Nebuchadnezzar, humbled by what he had seen, declared, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own." That day, the God of Israel was exalted in the heart of Babylon, and the faith of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah was proclaimed throughout the land. They had stood firm, even in the face of death, choosing loyalty to their God over the demands of a king. And in doing so, they bore witness to a power greater than any earthly kingdom, a faith that no fire could consume. Daniel's influence in Babylon continued to grow, and with it, envy among the other officials. Despite his integrity and loyalty, there were those who resented him, seeing his faith and wisdom as a threat. Determined to find a way to bring him down, they conspired against him, knowing that his unwavering devotion to his God was the only vulnerability they could exploit. The officials approached King Darius with a cunning plan, appealing to his ego and desire for loyalty. They proposed a decree. For 30 days, no one in the kingdom should pray to any god or man except the king himself. Anyone who disobeyed would be thrown into a den of lions. Flattered by the suggestion, Darius signed the decree into law, unaware that it was a trap meant solely for Daniel. When Daniel heard about the decree, he faced a choice. He could hide his faith, wait out the 30 days, or do what he had always done: pray openly to his God, regardless of the consequences. Resolute, he chose the latter. 3 times a day, as he always had, Daniel went to his upstairs room, opened his windows toward Jerusalem, and prayed, giving thanks to God. It wasn't long before the conspirators witnessed him praying and reported it to the king. Darius, realizing the trickery of his officials and the trap set for his most trusted advisor, was distressed. All day he searched for a way to save Daniel, but under the laws of the Medes and Persians, a royal decree could not be undone. Reluctantly, Darius ordered Daniel to be thrown into the lion's den, though he spoke words of hope to his friend. "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." With a heavy heart, the king sealed the den with a stone and placed his own seal upon it, preventing anyone from tampering with it. That night, Darius could neither eat nor sleep, troubled by thoughts of his loyal servant facing a cruel death. At the first light of dawn, he hurried to the den and called out, his voice filled with desperation, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" From within the darkness came a calm and confident voice. "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." Darius, overjoyed, ordered Daniel to be lifted from the den. Not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in his God. In his relief and gratitude, the king issued a decree to all the people of his kingdom, declaring, "In every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed, his dominion will never end." Through Daniel's unwavering faith, even in the face of death, the God of Israel was once again exalted in the heart of a foreign land. The mouths of lions had been shut, not by human power, but by the hand of the Almighty, demonstrating to all that no earthly plot could stand against the faith of one who trusted in God. In the years that followed, Daniel's life in Babylon was marked by visions and dreams, each more profound and mysterious than the last. These were no ordinary dreams. They were revelations from God, glimpses of the future that stretched far beyond the borders of Babylon and the reign of earthly kings. With each vision, Daniel saw events unfold, kingdoms rising and falling, leaders coming and going, but also a fierce, final conflict between good and evil. One night, a vision shook Daniel to the core. He saw four great beasts rising out of the sea, each more terrifying and powerful than the one before. Each beast represented a kingdom, strong yet ultimately temporary, passing away in the grand plan of God. These kingdoms, mighty as they were, would eventually crumble under the weight of their own pride and the power of the Almighty. Then Daniel's vision shifted, and he saw a figure described as one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. This figure approached the Ancient of Days, who sat on a throne ablaze with fire, a scene filled with splendor and reverence. Authority, glory, and sovereign power were given to this Son of Man, and his dominion was declared to be everlasting, a kingdom that would never fade or be destroyed. Daniel knew he was witnessing a revelation of the ultimate triumph of God's kingdom, a vision of a day when all other powers would bow to a greater king. But there was more. In another vision, Daniel saw a little horn rise up, one that spoke arrogant words and blasphemed against God. This horn represented a future ruler, one who would oppose God's people with fierce persecution, a figure later understood as the Antichrist. The vision showed a time of great suffering and darkness, a clash that would test the faith of many. Yet Daniel also saw hope. In the end, this blasphemous ruler would be overthrown, and the saints, those who remained faithful to God, would inherit the kingdom. This wasn't just a temporary victory, but a permanent, unshakable reign of righteousness, justice, and peace. The vision foretold a final battle between the forces of good and evil, and although darkness would threaten to overtake, light would ultimately prevail. As Daniel awoke, he was overwhelmed by the weight of these visions, feeling both a sense of awe and a deep sorrow for what would come. He didn't understand every detail, but he knew that he had witnessed the unfolding of a divine plan that stretched across time and empires. These visions were not just for his sake. They were revelations meant to strengthen and prepare the faithful, a message of both warning and hope. Daniel carried these visions with him, pondering their meaning, humbled by the knowledge that God had chosen him to receive these revelations. He understood that the struggle he and his friends had faced, the fiery furnace, the lion's den, the pressures of Babylon, were all part of a much larger story, a cosmic battle between forces that would continue until the ultimate victory of God's kingdom. Through these visions, Daniel was reminded of a profound truth, that no matter how powerful or vast the kingdoms of this world may seem, they are fleeting in comparison to the eternal kingdom of God. His life, his faith, his very presence in Babylon was a testament to that coming kingdom, a promise that no earthly power could stand against the purposes of the Almighty. Daniel's visions continued to unfold, painting a vivid picture of what lay ahead, not only for Babylon, but for all kingdoms of the earth. With each vision, he felt the weight of the spiritual battle that was raging unseen, a conflict that wasn't simply between nations, but between forces of good and evil, light and darkness. Among these revelations, a particular truth became clear to him. Humanity's resistance to God would bring times of hardship, when rulers would defy divine authority, leading their people into corruption and idolatry. This rebellion would not go unchecked, though. God's judgment was coming, not to destroy his creation, but to purify it, to separate those who remained faithful from those who embraced wickedness. One vision showed him a time of immense spiritual decline, when many would abandon their faith and embrace false gods and destructive ideologies. This vision was troubling, as it echoed the arrogance and idolatry Daniel had seen in Babylon, yet it was on a much grander scale. He saw how pride, ambition, and a lust for power would draw people away from the truth, their hearts hardened against the love and mercy of God. This was not just a warning for his time. It was a foreshadowing of humanity's constant struggle to choose between God's path and the ways of the world. But in the midst of this grim vision, Daniel saw something else, a great multitude of people who would stand firm, refusing to bow to idols or to the powers of darkness. These people, though tested and persecuted, would cling to their faith, holding onto the promise that God's kingdom would one day be fully revealed. They would be a light in the darkness, a testament to God's enduring presence among his people. The visions also showed a divine figure, radiant and powerful, whose very presence struck fear into the forces of evil. This figure, an angelic messenger, reminded Daniel of the strength that comes from God alone, giving him hope that no matter how intense the darkness became, the light of God's kingdom would prevail. The angel spoke words of encouragement, urging Daniel to record these visions, to pass them on as a message of endurance and assurance for future generations. With each vision, Daniel grew in understanding, realizing that his journey in Babylon was more than just a test of survival. It was part of a larger narrative, a preparation for a final redemption that would encompass all people and all nations. He had seen the suffering that would come, but he had also seen the victory that awaited those who stood firm. His life and the trials he endured were a foreshadowing of that struggle, a reminder that faith was not just a personal journey, but a battle, one fought on the battlefield of the soul. Daniel emerged from these visions with a renewed strength, a confidence that no earthly power could shake. Though he had witnessed the darkness that lay ahead, he held tightly to the assurance that God's justice would come, that the kingdom of heaven would stand triumphant, and that those who remained faithful would share in its everlasting peace. Through his visions, Daniel became not only a prophet, but a warrior of faith, called to remind all who would listen that the trials of this world were temporary, mere shadows before the dawning of an eternal kingdom where God's justice, love, and light would reign forever. With each vision, Daniel saw more clearly the promise of a kingdom unlike any other, a kingdom not built by human hands, but by the hand of God himself. In his final revelations, the promise of this eternal kingdom became a flame of hope within him, a vision of justice and peace that would one day replace the broken empires of the earth. This kingdom would be marked not by conquest, but by righteousness. In it, every tear would be wiped away, every sorrow healed. The faithful who had endured hardship, persecution, and suffering would find themselves clothed in honor and joy, dwelling in a land of everlasting peace. Daniel saw the humble lifted up, the persecuted comforted, and those who had kept their faith standing victorious alongside the King of Kings. In his visions, he glimpsed a throne of pure light, encircled by a multitude from every nation, tribe, and tongue. They were clothed in white, singing praises to the one who had redeemed them. This multitude was not there by virtue of earthly status or power. They were there because they had held onto the hope of this kingdom through every trial, every darkness. And before them stood the one who had defeated all darkness, the King who reigned with justice, mercy, and love. Daniel was deeply moved by the sight. He understood now, more than ever, that the empires of this world would rise and fall, but this divine kingdom would stand forever. The wealth and power that had once dazzled Babylon, the ambition and pride of its kings, would pale before the glory of this kingdom that had no end. It was a kingdom not only of divine justice, but of perfect peace, a fulfillment of every hope, every prayer that had ever ascended to heaven from the hearts of God's people. As Daniel reflected on these things, he felt a great peace settle over him. He knew his time in Babylon had been a part of something greater than himself. Every trial he and his friends had faced, the furnace, the lion's den, the tests of faith, had pointed to this promise. It was a promise that one day, all suffering would end, and all who had placed their trust in God would see the fulfillment of his justice and mercy. Daniel knew he might not see the fullness of this kingdom in his own lifetime, but he held it as a treasure in his heart, a truth that would guide him for the rest of his days. As he continued to serve in Babylon, he shared this hope with those around him, pointing them toward the eternal, unshakable kingdom of God. And so, Daniel's life became a living testimony, a beacon of faith that pointed toward the ultimate victory of light over darkness, of truth over deception, of life over death. His visions, his faith, and his perseverance would become a lasting legacy, a reminder to all generations that no matter how dark the days might become, God's kingdom is coming, and his justice and peace will reign forever.